Hey Reddit, throwaway because, well, this isn't exactly something you want your real name attached to. I've spent a lot of time thinking about whether I should even share this, but I figure maybe someone out there can learn from my stupidity. So, a little backstory. I'm William, and this is the story of the first time I really felt like I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. It started with something that, in retrospect, seems almost laughably small, but at the time, it felt huge. I was 22, broke, and desperate. I had this plan to travel, to see the world, but there was a massive obstacle. I had no money, no legal documents in order, and no way to get them the proper way. Enter the idea, forgery. Not grand heist, levels of criminal mastermind stuff, just a forged passport. A small deception, sure, but one that could have ruined my life if it went south. I remember staring at the idea, telling myself, it's just a piece of paper. Who's going to notice? But deep down, I already knew it wasn't that simple. The weird thing is, at that point, I wasn't even thinking about morality. I wasn't thinking about jail. I was thinking about the thrill. The rush of bending the rules just enough to make the impossible happen. And honestly, I was hooked before I even started. Once the idea took hold, it didn't let go. I told myself I was just researching, which is a funny word people use when they don't want to admit they're planning something illegal. Nights blurred into each other as I sat hunched over my laptop, bouncing between forums, old blog posts, and half-broken websites that looked like they hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. I wasn't looking for a blueprint, I was looking for confidence. Proof that people like me had done this and survived it. I made lists. Not the obvious kind that would scream crime, but vague ones disguised as travel prep. What documents I'd need. What questions officials usually asked. What details people took for granted but would notice if they were wrong. The smallest inconsistencies scared me the most. Fonts slightly off, dates that didn't line up, the wrong kind of wear on a page. I became paranoid about details I'd never cared about before. The planning phase messed with my head more than the crime itself. Every decision felt like it carried the weight of my entire future. I rehearsed conversations in the shower, practiced my signature until my hand cramped, and memorized personal details like I was studying for the most important exam of my life. I even planned backup stories, just in case someone questioned me. What stands out now is how calm I thought I was. On the surface, I was methodical, almost professional. Inside, though, there was this constant low-grade panic humming under everything. Still, I kept telling myself the same lie: if I prepare enough, nothing can go wrong. There's a moment in every bad decision where you stop thinking about doing it and actually do it. For me, that moment came quietly, without drama. No thunder, no moral voice booming in my head. Just me, sitting at a cheap desk, realizing that all the prep in the world meant nothing if I didn't act. I remember my hands shaking more than I expected. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that I noticed. That was new. I'd always thought of myself as steady under pressure. Turns out, pressure feels very different when you're the one creating it. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching myself from a few feet behind. I kept pausing, double-checking things I'd already checked a dozen times. The room was dead silent except for the hum of my computer fan and my own breathing, which I kept trying to slow down so I wouldn't feel like I was panicking. What surprised me most was how ordinary it felt. This wasn't some cinematic crime montage. It was boring, meticulous, and tense in a way that crawled under your skin. I kept thinking, this is it. This is the point of no return. And instead of backing out, I leaned into it. When I finally finished the last step, I didn't feel relief. I felt exposed. Like the walls suddenly had eyes and the air itself knew what I'd just done. I shut everything down faster than necessary, erased what I could, and sat there staring at nothing, heart pounding, wondering how something so quiet could feel so loud inside my head. After finishing the forgery, I couldn't just jump on a plane. That would be insane. So I did what any paranoid, adrenaline-addicted person would do, Test run. I printed a copy of the passport, not the final version, and tried walking into a random government office, acting like I belonged there. I won't lie, every step felt like walking a tightrope. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry, and I kept rehearsing the story in my head. New passport application, I muttered to myself under my breath, over and over. Every glance from a clerk made me want to curl into a ball and disappear. The clerk barely looked at me. I handed over the paper, half expecting the ceiling to open up and sirens to start wailing. Nothing happened. My heart was still racing, but I realized something: people don't notice as much as you think. It was terrifying and thrilling at the same time, like discovering you had the power to cheat the system and survive. That small success gave me a dangerous sense of confidence. I told myself, okay, maybe I really can do this. But deep down, a little voice reminded me I was dancing on a knife's edge. One misstep and everything would collapse. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. Mentally, physically, emotionally. I felt like I'd run a marathon in my brain. And yet, despite all the fear, there was a strange, guilty pride creeping in. I was in too deep to back out now. So, after weeks of planning and test runs, I finally decided it was time for the real thing. I had my forged passport, meticulously crafted, and a one-way ticket to somewhere, anywhere, that felt far enough from my life to make this feel like a rebirth. Walking into the airport, I felt like every eye was on me. Every step, every shuffle of my feet, felt amplified. I kept telling myself, stay calm. Breathe. You've done this before in practice. But the truth? Nothing had prepared me for the sheer intensity of actually doing it. When I handed over the passport at the counter, I swear my hands were shaking enough that it might have been visible if someone cared to look closely. The clerk glanced at the photo, then at my face, then back at the paper. My brain raced. They'll see it. They'll know. Just smile. Act normal. Don't look guilty. A long pause. Too long. I felt like time slowed, like every second was a spotlight shining down on my crime. And then, finally, the clerk stamped the passport and handed it back with a neutral, almost bored expression. Nothing. I wanted to laugh, cry, and throw up all at once. The adrenaline was so strong I could barely feel my legs. I walked away slowly, trying to act like nothing had happened, but inside my head was spinning. I had done it. I had crossed the line and survived. But, of course, that sense of triumph came with its own baggage. Even though no one had noticed, I couldn't stop thinking about what could have gone wrong. Every scenario, every what if, played on repeat in my mind. And that's when the fear really hit, the fear that this one tiny deception could spiral into something that ruined my life completely. After that first flight, I thought the worst was over. I imagined myself stepping off the plane, free and untouchable, like some rogue adventurer. Reality, of course, had other plans. For the next few days, I was a mess of adrenaline, guilt, and paranoia. Every knock on the door, every email notification, every phone vibration sent my heart racing. I double-checked my passport constantly, convinced someone had noticed a tiny flaw and was going to call me out. Sleeping became a joke. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined inspectors, police, and lawyers descending on me. I tried to act normal, to immerse myself in travel and new experiences, but my mind refused to quiet down. The thrill of getting away with it clashed with this constant gnawing anxiety. I was proud of my cleverness, but terrified of exposure. Even small interactions, like showing the passport at a hotel, felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of sharp blades. And then it hit me: the forgery wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a burden. A secret that followed me everywhere, invisible but heavy. I realized that even though I hadn't been caught, I was already paying a price, living in constant fear, never truly relaxing, always watching my own shadow. The small deception that had seemed harmless in my apartment felt enormous now, like a shadow stretching over everything I did. I had crossed the line, and even though no one knew, I could never go back to feeling innocent again. About 2 weeks into my freedom, I had my first real scare. I was checking into a hotel in a small European town, nothing fancy, just a place to crash for the night. The clerk glanced at my passport, frowned slightly, and asked a question I hadn't anticipated. This passport was issued in a city I'm not familiar with. Did you apply there? Time froze. My stomach sank. My mind raced through every possible answer. I could tell the truth, which would obviously get me in trouble. I could lie, which might work, or might blow up in my face. I swallowed hard, forced a casual smile, and said, "Yeah, I had to apply there because it was faster than my home city. Bureaucracy, you know?" My voice sounded shaky, even to me. The clerk raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Somehow it passed. I left the counter with my heart hammering in my chest, convinced that at any second they'd call the police after me. That night, I sat in my tiny hotel room, staring at the ceiling, my hands trembling. I kept replaying the encounter over and over. If I had stuttered once, if my explanation had sounded off, I would have been caught. I realized then that living with a forged passport wasn't just about getting through borders, it was a constant gamble. And the worst part? Even though I had escaped that close call, I felt different. The thrill was gone, replaced by this heavy, creeping dread. Every success carried the weight of what could have happened. I had survived, yes, but only barely. After that hotel incident, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was full-blown paranoia. Every little sound, every glance, every interaction made me jump. I double-checked my passport dozens of times a day. Even something as innocent as a uniformed officer walking past made my heart race like I was about to be arrested on the spot. I started imagining scenarios constantly. What if my photo got circulated? What if someone noticed the smallest inconsistency in the stamp or my name? What if I got pulled aside at the airport next time? The possibilities were endless, and I went down each rabbit hole until I was exhausted and dizzy. I also noticed I was becoming socially awkward. Friends I called from abroad noticed my evasive answers and sudden pauses when discussing travel. I avoided posting photos online, even mundane ones, afraid someone could trace them and connect the dots. Every day, my life shrank into a tiny sphere of caution and suspicion. The thrill I had felt during the forgery and first flights. Gone. Replaced by this gnawing anxiety that clung to me like a second skin. I realized, maybe too late, that a small deception like a forged passport isn't just small. It has consequences that echo through every part of your life, long after the immediate danger passes. By this point, my life had transformed in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every choice I made, from where I stayed to how I interacted with people, was filtered through the lens of that one forged document. I wasn't just traveling anymore. I was living in the shadows of my own deception. I avoided any situation that could draw attention. Airports became torture chambers of anticipation, and official-looking buildings felt like traps waiting to snap shut. Even casual encounters made me second-guess myself. A curious question from a stranger could unravel everything. I became hyper-aware of details that used to be invisible: how passports were held, how clerks examined documents, the exact angle a photo should be displayed. Emotionally, it was exhausting. I oscillated between guilt, shame, and the occasional thrill of having beaten the system. But those highs were fleeting. Most of the time, I felt trapped by my own choices, like I had locked myself in a cage I couldn't escape. I also started lying constantly, not just about the passport, but about little things that could hint at my real situation. I became an actor in my own life, performing normalcy while internally screaming. It was isolating. I couldn't fully trust anyone, because trust itself felt dangerous. That's when I realized the truth: the crime wasn't just about the act itself. It was about the life it forced me to live afterward. Every small deception had compounded, and I was already paying the price, not in jail, not yet, but in fear, stress, and the slow erosion of freedom. Inevitably, my luck started to run out. It was a minor thing, almost laughably small in hindsight, but in my state of constant paranoia, it felt catastrophic. I was at another hotel, checking in late at night. The clerk glanced at my passport and, without thinking, asked, "Have you renewed this recently?" My mind froze. I knew the answer. Technically, yes, but any hesitation would raise suspicion. I muttered something vague about delays and bureaucracy, trying desperately to sound casual. The clerk tilted their head, giving me that subtle, suspicious look that instantly makes your stomach drop. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. Every instinct screamed run, lie, disappear, but I stayed, repeating my rehearsed story like a mantra. Somehow, by the skin of my teeth, the clerk nodded and moved on. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing just how close I'd come to being caught. That small slip-up wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It wasn't a chase or a shouting match. But it terrified me more than anything before. It was the realization that no matter how careful I was always one small mistake away from disaster. And the fear wasn't just about jail. It was about my whole life unraveling. Everything I'd worked for, every plan, every lie, gone in an instant. By now, the stress wasn't just occasional, it was constant. My paranoia had seeped into every corner of my mind, making even normal tasks feel like minefields. I started jumping at every knock, every unexpected noise, every stranger's glance. Sleep became a rare luxury, interrupted by nightmares of being caught, interrogated, or thrown into a cell for months, or years. I also noticed how it affected my personality. I was quieter, more withdrawn, less spontaneous. Friends and travel companions noticed I was tense, jittery, and distracted. I lied about little things constantly, even mundane facts, just to maintain the illusion of normalcy. That constant vigilance was exhausting. And then came the guilt. At first, it was buried under adrenaline and the thrill of getting away with it. But it started leaking out, tiny cracks that widened into full-blown anxiety. I couldn't enjoy anything fully because every moment was haunted by the thought, what if someone finds out? What if I slip? Ironically, the crime that had started as an exciting, daring adventure had turned into a prison of my own making. I had all the freedom I wanted physically, but mentally and emotionally, I was shackled. The thrill had faded, leaving only fear, exhaustion, and a gnawing sense of shame. It happened on a quiet afternoon in a small cafe. I was sitting with my laptop, pretending to work, when a man in a suit approached me. He didn't introduce himself, just asked to see my passport. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it was some random official, maybe immigration, maybe local authorities. I fumbled for my bag, hands shaking, rehearsing explanations in my head. The man's eyes scanned my document, pausing on details I had carefully forged months ago. My mind raced. This is it. This is the end. All the stress, all the lies, it's over. He looked up, and for a terrifying moment, I saw what I can only describe as suspicion, not anger, not accusation, but the sharp, piercing doubt that can destroy a life. I opened my mouth to speak, to justify, to invent some plausible story, and then, he smiled and said something completely mundane about his own travel experiences before walking away. I sat frozen, heart hammering, hands trembling, realizing I had just survived a moment that could have ended everything. It wasn't dramatic or violent, but it was terrifying in a way nothing else had been. One wrong word, one slip of confidence, and my entire life could have been exposed. That incident drove home a brutal truth. No matter how careful I was, living with a forgery meant I was always on the edge of disaster. And worse, I knew the paranoia wasn't going away. I was trapped in a life where any moment could unravel me completely. After that near exposure, I couldn't stop thinking. I found a quiet park bench one evening, staring at the darkening sky, trying to untangle the mess I'd made of my life. For the first time in months, I let myself really feel it. The fear, the guilt, the exhaustion, and the shame. I realized that the forgery, which had started as a thrill, had become a shadow over everything. Every interaction, every trip, every moment of supposed freedom had been tainted by constant vigilance. I had traded my peace of mind for a piece of paper and a few fleeting adventures. What struck me most was how lonely it was. I couldn't confide in anyone, couldn't share the truth with friends or family. Every conversation was a performance, every smile a mask. I felt like I had created a cage for myself, invisible to the outside world but crushing from the inside. And yet, there was a strange clarity in that solitude. I began to understand how easily one small decision, a forged passport, could cascade into months of fear, guilt, and self-doubt. I wasn't caught, not yet. But the psychological toll was heavy, and the adrenaline highs that had fueled me were gone, replaced by a gnawing awareness of how fragile my life had become. After weeks of living on edge, I realized I couldn't keep going like this. The constant paranoia, the sleepless nights, the gnawing guilt, it was eating me alive. I had gotten away with the forgery, yes, but at what cost? My freedom, my peace of mind, my ability to trust myself or anyone else, all of it felt compromised. One evening, sitting alone in a tiny hostel room, I made a decision. I was done. I couldn't erase the past, but I could stop letting it control me. I started taking steps to minimize risk, avoiding any official scrutiny, lying less, and trying to regain a sense of normalcy. I didn't know if it was foolproof, but it was a start. That turning point didn't come with fireworks or dramatic revelation. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic. But in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a hint of clarity. I understood that the thrill I'd chased wasn't worth the endless fear and anxiety. And I realized that getting away with it wasn't freedom, it was just a temporary reprieve from consequences I had invited into my life. For the first time, I thought about the future not as a series of risks and lies, but as something I could cautiously reclaim. It was fragile, but it was mine. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how something that seemed so small, just a forged passport, managed to consume so much of my life. I didn't get caught, but that doesn't mean I won. I traded months of constant fear, paranoia, and guilt for a piece of paper and a few weeks of thrill. And the cost? My peace of mind, my sleep, and a sense of normalcy I didn't realize I'd taken for granted. If there's one thing I want anyone reading this to understand, it's that the law isn't the only danger. The psychological toll is real. The stress, the paranoia, the isolation, they're invisible consequences that hit harder than any jail sentence could. You might survive the act itself, but living in the shadow of your own choices can feel like a lifetime sentence. I've learned to respect boundaries, rules, and the weight of even small decisions. That thrill of cheating the system? It's fleeting, and it comes with a cost far greater than most people realize. So, my advice, don't do what I did. Think twice about taking shortcuts that seem harmless. They rarely are. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember this: one piece of paper, one small deception, can change everything about how you live your life, even if you never get caught. Would I do it again? Absolutely not. The adrenaline wasn't worth the years of fear, and the lesson I've carried is one I'll never forget.